Welcome to Grab Your Gear. This is Joe. A little bit of a schedule change this week because of the presidential debate tonight. I'm going to preview the debate with Jack Windsor here in a second, and then we are going to do a kind of an analysis of what we think, information we've got. We're going to follow some folks and try to collect that for you tomorrow. So we'll have a review of it tomorrow, but today we do a little bit of a preview of what we anticipate, what might happen, what to look for. And with that said, welcome in Jack Windsor. Jack, of course, the founder and managing editor of the Ohio Press Network and the host of the Jack Windsor Report. If you're in Columbus, it's on 98.9 FM in Columbus, Ohio, and you can stream that show as well and probably podcast too, right, Jack? I mean, you can get it anywhere.
That's correct. Absolutely. Yep.
And you're a 5-day-a-weeker, aren't you?
I am, Monday through Friday, 5 p.m., 6 p.m. on 98.9 FM, The Answer. And then you can download all of the past episodes on Spotify. Just search up the Windsor Report.
Got it. Okay. Now, want to preview the debate tonight, and I'm just going to give you some data, and I want you to react to it, if that's okay. All right. So before we get into the mechanics of it or anything like that, I took some time, actually did this at the end of last week, heading into the debate. And what I did was I looked at what I saw as polls and what people in general across the country saw as the issues, the top 5 to 6, 7 issues. And then I went and looked at NBC News, and I pulled them randomly, mostly because I used to work there. And I looked and I wanted to get an idea of what they saw as the major issues. So with regular people, just generic balloting, number one was inflation, which kind of also went into the economy and housing when you kind of mix them all together. So it's kind of inflation, economy, and affordable housing. 2 was immigration, border security, and tied to that for 3 was safety and crime. I almost think that's kind of all the same line. It's probably border, crime, safety, all that stuff. 4 was healthcare, which I took as affordable healthcare, prescriptions, stuff like that. And by the way, that was kind of way down the line. This was kind of inflation, economy, housing, immigration, border security. It was like this big 1 and 2 thing mixed together. And then it kind of went down healthcare. And then it was foreign policy, foreign wars. But those were like way down the list. And then after that, you had other things that we talk about. What I found interesting was then when I went to NBC News, they go, here are the top 7 issues you should watch for in the presidential election. It was abortion was number 1, immigration, and theirs was healthcare, 3, prescription drugs. 4 was taxes. 5 was judges and the Supreme Court. 6 was trade, and 7 was foreign policy and NATO. Okay, heading into the election, where do you think's really talking to America, and are all these topics going to be covered tonight?
Well, I think the topics will be covered, the ones that NBC says are important, because NBC's sponsors want to frame the debate and discussion in the vein of those topics. So, but what most Americans are concerned about, Joe, based on people who read the stuff that we put out on the news site, based on people who call into the radio show, based on people that I talk with walking around town every day, inflation. People are concerned about gas prices, groceries, daycare, paying their utility bills. I used the story once. I'm going to use it again because it's powerful. I have a friend who's not very political, but she posted something on Facebook a couple of weeks ago showing what her utility bills were in 2021, 22, 23, 24, and within the month of August. And it went from, the bills went from somewhere above $100 to just below $500. That's what Americans are concerned about. Yeah, that's what Americans are concerned about. And, the immigration border stuff is really, I think, on a lot of people's minds, because this isn't just an issue in Texas and Florida and what you would consider southern border states. There are places like Ohio where you would think, wow, Ohio's pretty far removed from the southern border, where illegal immigrants are driving up the shortage in housing. They're committing crimes. So these are the things that are on people's radar.
Well, not to interrupt, but Springfield, Ohio is inundated with 50,000 migrants. I mean, they're from Haiti, I guess, right? But like 50,000.
many from Haiti. And this goes in two ways. I talked with someone there actually a few weeks back, and I said, well, what do you think about this? Illegals that are coming in. And he said something interesting. And I'm just going to put it out there for what it is. He goes, are they illegal if the government's bringing them in? And so I'm
That's
not
a
quite
damn
sure
good
what,
question.
right?
That's a damn
And
good
I didn't even
question,
get into
though.
the politics of it. Are you on the right or are you the left? But his perception was, are they illegal if the
Yeah.
government's shipping them here and allowing them to be here? But here's the other part, Joe. There are some people, particularly in the center to the right, who go, are these illegals going to vote in our elections? So when we think about immigration, it's not just crime. It's not just shortage in housing. It's not, driving prices up. It's like, are they going to commit crimes? Are they going to do nefarious things? But if I can, I do want to
Mhm.
I do want to admit with NBC, so abortion, immigration, healthcare, and prescription drugs and
Yeah.
taxes, those are all four talking points for the Biden-Harris administration, right? They want billionaires and millionaires to pay their fair share, so of course they want to talk about taxes. Joe Biden wants to tub thump on lowering prescription costs. That's what he's going to, or Kamala's going to take credit for that. They want to talk about immigration now because, and by the way, CNN actually called Kamala Harris out on this last week. They want to talk about immigration now because Kamala Harris all of a sudden has seen the light and believes that we should have a border wall. So,
Yeah, I
that's a
saw that.
position that I think
Yeah.
she's going to try to use as, hey, look, battleground states, I care about the safety security of our country. But abortion, I want to hit this very quickly. Abortion, in some sense, and I don't want to go too far in the weeds, is on the ballot in places like Florida, Maryland, New York, Montana, Nevada, Arizona, Colorado, Nebraska, South Dakota, because like Ohio last fall, voters had to decide, did we want to put into our state constitution the right for women to abort children up to birth for matters of convenience? And regardless of what anyone in the press tells you, that's exactly what that amendment in Ohio aimed to do and will do eventually. So there are states that are deciding that at the state level, and the Democrats are going to absolutely use that to drive up turnout in the
Yeah.
election because that's the only way they can win.
And that drives up her base, which is college educated women, according
Yep.
to the poll. We'll get into that. All right. So for the debate, hosted on ABC, World News Tonight anchor David Muir, who I've only seen a few times because I really don't watch, the traditional network news. But when I've seen him talk, he's like the best. He'd be the best voiceover guy for a really bad documentary. When he talks, it just makes you think that, you know, he's the guy making $1,500 to read, the transitions for a documentary. And then Lindsay Davis will moderate the debate as well. Who's she? Do you know?
You know what? I saw the name, and I have not done any recon on Lindsay Davis.
Okay.
I'm assuming that because it's ABC and because Kamala agreed to it, there's some safety and security there. But I can't speak. I would be speaking out of turn if I tried to
Okay.
project onto Lindsay certain qualities.
Okay. And as far as we know, she'll be alone, and she won't bring her security animal, vice president, running for vice president, her colleague, right? The
Well,
governor of
yeah,
Minnesota.
her emotional support monkey is what I call him.
Yeah, Waltz. Okay, so Trump proposed two debates, one on Fox News September 4th, which is gone, and NBC News on the 25th, but the campaign, I don't think, responded. So one debate is what it looks like. Now, does that make Harris, okay, two questions on just heading into it. I have two questions. For her not wanting to do more than one debate, does that make her look weak, or is it just a mulligan? And are we so social media driven that we don't look at some of the obvious things that may be said? Because people look at sound bites basically on social media. A lot of people consume information that way.
Yeah.
So whoever's running her campaign, I would assume the one thing they want to be careful of is, and I'm not bashing her, but they don't like her unscripted. So heading into the debate, does she look weak, and what will be the strategy to make her look good on social media and not get into an unscripted situation that makes her look bad?
Yeah, I think to people who are fair-minded and really trying to figure out her policy positions, I think it makes her look weak. What I don't have a pulse on right now, Joe, is how many of those people there are. And I've said for a long time, I think there's a lot baked into the numbers already. I think there are very few undecideds, although some recent polls say that that number may be larger than I originally anticipated. But to me, it looks weak. However, I think for Kamala Harris, it's a brilliant move because her campaign really rests on low information voters. So, and let me give you an example. I think it was July 21st, Joe Biden announced that he was not going to seek reelection. And by August 7th, ABC had published a story, and other major news outlets had already started talking about this. Can Kamala ride Mames all the way to the White House? And so, the mainstream press was already kind of prepping us for this idea that whatever she is, whoever she is, we can discern that from these 7-second sound bites and these really quirky looking memes that are out there. So I think for low information voters, this will work. And let's be real clear though too. There have been incumbents in the past who have come from a position of strength. If they're already in office, they say, well, I don't really have to debate. My record speaks for itself. And I think that's how Harris's campaign will spin this. But I got to tell you, the optics on her getting into an airplane with headphones in and then eventually holding a smartphone up to her ear really makes it look like she's running from hard questions and having to go on the record.
No, it makes
So
it look stupid.
it
It
makes
made
her
it,
look
it,
completely
I mean,
inept.
just to be honest, and I'm just saying, when I saw that, I go, but it's just, tell me everybody in the world doesn't know what you're doing. You're just trying
Right.
to avoid taking it. Yeah. I mean, it'd been better if she just left him in and was like bopping, like she was listening to her jams.
Right? That would have gone. That would have gone a lot better for her. But this is her trying to hedge her bets because I genuinely believe the more she has to be confronted with. By the way, as I mentioned, CNN has already come out and said, "Well, wait a minute, Kamala Harris is flip flopping on the border wall
Yeah.
here,"
They've started
and
to talk about it a little bit.
yeah, the more she has to be in the limelight and answer to reporters, and worse, probably go directly against Donald Trump, who will annihilate her on facts. I think the better it is for her. So I think she's hedging her bets.
Okay. So Trump, on the other hand, goes anywhere except CNN, MSNBC, and the traditional news networks. Last Thursday, he did a speech at the Economic Club of New York, which is kind of not, I wouldn't say his base, not a campaign rally, that's for sure.
No.
But he delivered an economic plan, fairly complex if you don't follow that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Discussed tariffs as kind of an economic weapon. One thing I found interesting, and I don't want to get into too much of the data and stuff, but I'll just tell you the stuff I found interesting. That he suggested a corporate tax rate be set at 15% for
Mm-hmm.
companies that manufacture their products in the United States, which would be a kind of a worker bump and
Mm-hmm.
made in America push. Otherwise, your taxes for corporations would be at 21%. I found this fascinating. He said that Elon Musk agreed that he would lead a task force to basically create government efficiencies. Now, that's code to me for cutting government because what was the first thing he did when he took over Twitter? They had
Yeah.
7,500 employees. He cut the staff about by 80%. I think there's 1,500 employees at Twitter now.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's your economic efficiency government guy. What are your thoughts? I don't know if you followed that speech at all last week, but that was pretty much his economic policy laid out. And people are struggling outside of the one thing Harris has pushed is the unrealized capital gain tax. What that would mean is you'd be taxing uh, your income before you realized it, before you got it. Mark Cuban last week went out and said that would kill the stock market, and she doesn't really mean it. Literally held a press conference, said it was just, she doesn't really mean it. And but that's the one thing that her economic plan, that's the one thing I keep hearing over and over. And why that's also important is stock market is tied to your 401k. And
That's
most
right.
people don't have a pension, they have a 401k. So you get into this, it gets a little muddy. So based on what I just threw at you, Trunk's talking economics. That's all we know of Harris. Where am I wrong? How do you think will they even discuss the economy tonight, or will they just go by it?
I think they'll have to discuss the economy because, as James Carville said, it's the economy, stupid. And I think that is the position that Trump is going to have to take. So whether the moderators steer him there or he just goes there, it's going to have to come back down to that because the question he's going to ask is the one that was asked a long time ago. Uh, are you better off today than you were 4 years ago? And the resounding answer economically is absolutely not. And not only are people paying more for everything that they need every day, uh, the forecasts down the road look awful. And Donald Trump really likes popular people. Elon Musk is a popular person, and I think that's as
Not to
much,
everybody.
not to
There's certain
everybody.
people in the left that want to see him go to jail.
Yeah, and those people are not going to vote for Donald Trump anyway. And so
No.
I think this is just ginning up attention. I think it's ginning up, um, I don't know, some popularity support, if you will.
Oh,
It's
I
headline
think he's
worthy.
serious. I think he's serious. And I think Elon Musk will give him 6 months and do it in 6 months. This
Well,
isn't going to be
yeah,
like a 4-year thing.
no, absolutely not. He's going to come in and he's going to right size the government, which, by the way, um, people who support Kamala Harris, they hate that because they're going to call everybody that Trump would want to cut in his second administration civil servants. And he's lashing out against civil servants. No, we have a 35 to your, and I'm going to tie this in with Kamala Harris's economic plan. We have a $35 trillion debt. That's trillion with a T. That's
Yeah.
$100,000 for you, Joe, for me, for each of our kids. That's way too much money. And we continue to deficit spend at 2 trillion. We'd know that Kamala Harris wants to increase taxes an additional 5 trillion. Where's that money going to come from? And she does want to tax unrealized capital gains. And if Mark Cuban is her economic advisor, then he needs to declare that. But what that basically means is if you own companies or if you're a farmer, uh, then whatever the value is of what you own, as it goes up, as the assessment of that value is increased, you then have to cut a check. So you either have to be cash rich or you have to start selling things, which can be
Correct.
completely disruptive to people who are trying to maintain farms, build businesses. And the argument is, well, it's at $100 million. Well, that's the starting point. It may end up getting ratcheted down. And by the way, once the camel's nose is under the tent, it's all the way in. And so
Okay.
that would be a really dangerous starting point for free markets. Um, and you know, the other thing that she talks about, she's stolen from Trump too, which is the no tax on tips, and and the border wall is going to cost more money too. So where's that going to come from, Kamala? So she's really making a lot of promises. Her mouth is making promises that what do they say? Her rear end can't cash, or at
That's
least
right.
the bank account can't
Well,
cash.
the thing I find fascinating, first of all, I did want to mention something. I don't think there is an undecided voter. Where you said you thought the numbers were higher, I think a lot of people that get polled go, I'm undecided, so they don't have to talk to anybody. I think, and I just think they don't want to deal with it. It's like people that don't, it's like you have the decided, real passionate people and they have a yard sign. And then you have the people who just don't want to be messed with because they're going to vote. They're more intellectually driven, intellectually meaning they're practical, right? If it's the economy or whatever, they're just saying, I gotta do this or I gotta do that. So I did want to mention that. The other part was, so that's the economy. And Mark Cuban coming out and saying she didn't mean it, I found that fascinating because to me, if you're prepping somebody, you would say, is it true you're doing this, or is it what Mark Cuban said, and that is you really want to do it, which means you're lying. I mean,
That's right.
that's almost the line right there. Crime. This is one thing too. I tried to look into this last week.
Yeah.
President Biden likes to say violent crime has dropped more than 20% based on FBI data, which when you dig into it, there's supposedly a 20% drop, but people still, when you pull them, don't feel safe or safer, as the data corrected. Associated Press put out a few articles on crime referencing that while crime has dropped in major cities like New York, Chicago, San Francisco, Detroit, it's actually up. So I guess crime's down in the rural area. So that was one of the things I found. Do people react to what they're told, or do they react to what they feel? You
I
know?
think people feel like there's a lot of gaslighting going on, and
Yeah.
rightfully so. But let's be honest, we have this confirmation bias. So there are people who want to believe that that's true who are going to latch onto it. Here's the big problem with it, Joe. It's a lie. In I believe there was a 2021, there was a big change. The Uniform Crime Reporting Project, and the FBI changed the way that they started collecting data. And
Yeah.
in the process of doing that, many agencies, many police departments didn't get information to the FBI in a timely way, or they didn't get onto the new system. So what we now know is that the FBI came out after they collected the 2022 information. They couldn't say whether crime was up, down, or the same. Yet policymakers and politicians took those numbers and started running with them. I would point folks, and I know this is kind of nerd stuff, but there's something called the Marshall Project, marshallproject.org. If you go there, it really brings some common sense to what's really going on. But some myth busters here: the New York Police Department and the LA Police Department, their information was not entered into the FBI database. So you have two of your biggest police departments in the country who didn't report. And so when someone says violent crime is down in New York, well, it didn't get reported, so you can't really say that.
That's it. That's the old malinformation we talked about on our last podcast. It's true, but
Right.
inconvenient, so you ignore it.
And then less than 10% from places like Pennsylvania and Florida, and that matters because Pennsylvania is a battleground state. Some people think Florida's in play. Was uploaded into the database. So at best, we don't know. But I'll give you just a real quick anecdotal situation here.
Not to interrupt, but do you really think Florida is in play?
No, I don't think it. I don't think it is. I worry. I worry about shenanigans, Joe. I worry about every state being in play, unless the election integrity is completely shored up, and unless people's feet are held to the fire. Look, we live in a time where technology is at its peak, and you're telling me that we can't get ballots counted within 2 hours, 4 hours, 6 hours a day, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days. It's insane.
Do it in Ohio. We do it in Ohio
All the time, every election. So it is possible. But no, I don't necessarily think Florida's in play. But, stranger things have happened. But the anecdotal evidence, real quick, was there was this claim, I think about a year ago, that hate crime actually went down. And the FBI came out and said, well, wait a minute, there's like 7,000 different departments that we didn't collect this information from. So we're going to do that. They did it. And what they found was that hate crime was actually up 12%.
Ask a Jewish kid at Columbia University if he thinks hate crime's down.
That's right.
Polling. So back to that. Let's as we go towards this. Kamala Harris has a substantial lead in one major category, and that is college-educated women. And I don't mean to be disrespectful here, but when I hear that term, I think of the Today Show and The View. And I don't know. I mean, I do. I don't mean to be sarcastic, but that's what comes to my mind. That studio audience sitting there watching that. So then comes Nate Silver.
Yeah.
And this came out last week. He has how do you describe? I mean, he has a site. It's a paywall, but he gets a lot of information out. He's kind of a techno number nerd guy.
Data junkie.
I think he's a Democrat though. But I mean, he stays straight. I think he tries to make it academic and less emotional, right?
Right.
But then he writes emotionally, like, "Oh my God," He said the election forecast model shows Trump chances of winning the Electoral College have increased from 52.4 to 58. And I think since then it's gone up to 60.
Yes.
Harris holds about went from 47 to 41.6%. And then I think that just went under 40 to 39. And he noted that Harris really didn't get a big DNC bump. And then he referenced that really her biggest crowd was educated, college graduated women. Now, the other factors he put in were Kennedy dropping out of the race. And he said that initially expected to hurt Harris by like 0.5. He said actually that JFK drew more Trump voters because he's actually campaigning for Trump. And last Friday, I pulled out the Wall Street Journal. Go to last Friday's Wall Street Journal if you can get it. He has an editorial in there called "Trump Can Make America Healthy Again." But he also touches on the fact that, just some of the garbage that's gone on to Trump that's also gone on to him, censoring and some of that stuff. Because that Bobby Kennedy Jr. thing, I think stings them emotionally more than I don't think it changed. Maybe it changes voting. I don't know, but it would be kind of like Ronald Reagan coming back to earth, life and endorsing Kamala, because the Kennedy family is just such a institution in the Democratic Party. And then lastly, before I get your reaction, Nate Silver says Harris has a poor showing in Pennsylvania, and that it's disproportionate. And Pennsylvania is a pivotal state, and he thinks that a lot of the hoopla there is she is underperforming. And the last thing he said, and it kind of ties to it, he goes, he's having a hard time calculating that she was so unpopular as a vice president up until like 6 weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
And if her favorability numbers have truly reverted and changed, he wonders if that's temporary as well. So that was some of the factors that went into his data. As we wrap it up here, just your reaction to that dump I just put on you on polling, who's looking at it, and that's what I was saying. Is anybody really uncommitted right now? It is an odd time. It is hard to get your hands around it, but this is what I feel like. I
Yeah.
feel like you keep telling me you love me, but you keep dating other people. That's what it feels like.
That might be the best analogy I've heard. And I'll just give you a little anecdote. I was out to dinner last night with the family, looked across the way. There was someone there that I know. And he just kind of looked at me and said, he knows what I do. He said, "You worried about November?" And I said, "Well, what do you mean worried?" He goes, I don't believe that this race is as close as what people are telling me. And I just feel like they're trying to create this perception so that they can pull shenanigans. And I said, touche. And I think that there are a lot of people, Joe, who feel that way. A couple
I
of
do
things.
on the Russiagate thing. The thing that the Russiagate came up by the Attorney General and the FBI, that
Yep.
bugs me. And by the way, last Friday's Wall Street Journal. I mean, if you need it, I'll send it to you. Kimberly Stossel, who's a writer, she said, "What's a greater threat to election integrity, Russia and what we've proven they do and don't do, or the DOJ bringing this stuff up and almost creating a narrative that it was Russia while they're taking a former president to court." I didn't mean to interrupt you, but that put a different light on it. That is the DOJ actually election interfering at this point.
Yes, they are. Because if someone on the right were to say that the DOJ interfered with the election, they would go apoplectic. Russia, China, they meddle in every elections. That's what they do. That's what communist regimes do.
And
And
on
so they
campuses,
try to
they
influence on
yeah.
campuses. Yeah. And so the idea that they're now calling it election interference is almost comical given that they tried this thing, in 2016 and it was debunked, disproven, but they're wheeling out the old game show again here. And so I think that doesn't pass the sniff test. I think people are starting to realize there's a disproportionate number of Democrats being polled than Republicans in some of these bigger poll results that we're getting. The other thing that's happening, CNN's poll on battleground states that dropped this week that showed Kamala up, but Trump, maybe tied or up in a place like Arizona. It has a margin of error of 5%. That's a massive margin of error if you're doing the poll the right way. And by the way, add to that the fact that Trump usually outperforms the polls by about 5%. So you might be looking at about a 10% swath here, and then add in the fact that they might be polling more Democrats than Republicans. So I think a lot of people look at the polls and go, I ain't buying it. I think there's a lot of trepidation right now. I think there's a lot of fear that there's going to be the inability from the left to accept a Donald Trump win, and it's going to be followed up by what we saw in 2016, claims that Russia interfered, claims of you name it. And to me, I think as we get closer to election day, I think that Kamala Harris's numbers continue to go down. I would comfortably say maybe except Minnesota and maybe Wisconsin. I think Trump's up in every battleground state right now. But you and I have talked about this before, Joe. I think there's going to be a black swan event or something significant. And here's my guess. My guess is that we're going to see something very close to the election that is AI generated. It's going to be Trump being accused of saying something or doing something. It's going to hit the web. It's going to have that fractional bump that they want it to have. And a day or two after the election, they're going to go, "Oh well, you know what? This wasn't accurate. We're sorry." well, you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. So I think that we're going to see something like that down the stretch, if you know what I mean, like deep fakes, whether it's video, whether it's audio. But these guys are scumbags, and they're going to try anything.
I worked for a man one time. I was flying with him back from Israel, and it was right after I started working with him. He's a national media figure, and I was with our crew, our documentary crew, and he said, "I really appreciate you guys, and the work you're doing is great. And you're going to hear a lot of stuff about me." And he goes, "But anything you hear about me after 2000 is a lie. But anything you hear about me that's bad before 2000 was probably true." And I laugh, and I almost feel like Donald Trump's got to say, anything you hear about me going forward that sounds suspect is. And it's almost the same thing. That anything you heard about me in my earlier life, sure, I did a lot of stupid things, but I kind of agree with you. I think this Russia thing all of a sudden popping up again, it's like, didn't we go through this, especially after an investigation that lasted 3 years, and but it's like, wow, this is what they're pulling out again. And when I mean I don't mean the Democrats. I mean people who are like leftist, and they call them elite, but I don't know. It's just a weird time. It is a very everybody who listens, this is a design for people to get up and go to work and don't have time to get into the crap like you and I do, Jack. And I
Right.
guess the biggest thing we have to hope for is those people that get up every morning, grab their gear, and go to work. They have
Mhm.
common sense, and I think we have to
Yeah,
lean on their common sense when it comes into November.
I agree. And one final point, because you mentioned Pennsylvania and you mentioned Kamala Harris's popularity. The press is real eager when somebody says she's the most unpopular vice president in history. They go, "Oh, no, 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 that's wrong." Okay, Dick Cheney might have been at 61%, Dan Quayle at 63%, but Kamala was at like 59%. So she was an extremely unpopular president. And by the way, this was September of last year. Okay, so this was very recently, and now all of a sudden we're expected to believe that her favorability numbers are up. Part of that might be they had a dead man walking, and I think Democrats recognized there was no way in Hades Joe Biden was going to get elected. I think it unleashed some enthusiasm when Kamala, took his place. But once people remembered, oh, this is who she is, I think we're going to see again her numbers continue to plummet. And the Pennsylvania thing is real. I had Scott Pressler on my radio show with me last week. Scott has been doing a lot of grassroots work in significant counties in Pennsylvania, and that work entails getting people registered to vote. And at one point, I think it was in I want to say 2016, Democrats had a 300,000 person advantage in registered voters. That gap has been closed to almost minuscule now. So there are more Republicans registered in Pennsylvania. There's more get out to vote activity going on in Pennsylvania. I think it will be the pivotal state, and I think Trump can win it.
These people do not want to lose power, and though I go back to the two things we talked about. One, they're bringing up Russia, Russia, Russia again, and I still can't get past the Zuckerberg thing. I still can't get past the fact that he put a letter out, and I can't get past the fact that he has more data than anybody on the planet.
Yep.
And that's why I think there's gonna, are we conspiracy theorists, or are we just realists when we say I think there's going to be a lot of shenanigans? And
Oh, there will
I think
always
people,
be shenanigans. They call it an October surprise for a reason.
yeah,
And by the
I'm
way,
talking about election night. I mean, but we have to be prepared. We have to have common sense. But one way or another, if Donald Trump does win, I do think there's going to be just a lot of unrest, because I think there are a lot of people that mentally just can't handle it. And I mean, they're in the millions.
yeah. Well, there's a very powerful and entrenched establishment. I call it the Washington, D.C. cabal, and it's Republicans and Democrats. And these are the never
It
Trumpers.
is.
These are the Kamala Harris, Joe Biden supporters. And so if he does win, it is the death knell for them. And they're going to fight tooth and nail to maintain any semblance of power that they have. How that looks, I don't know. I've gone on record to say I think they will try to stop him from getting into the White House. I think they will, try to hold up the transition of power and try to negotiate some really weird stuff. You and I've talked about this before, but strap in. Just
Yeah.
here we go.
All right. Jack Windsor of the Ohio Press Network, thank you very much for being with us today. All we're saying is buckle up. We're giving you things to think about. We're not telling you how to think. These are things that we've looked into. These are things that we follow. And as they change, we'll give them to you. We will be back tomorrow with our post-debate analysis. And of course, you can catch Jack if you're in Columbus, or if you you can get his podcast, The Windsor Report. And his radio show is on 98.9 FM in Columbus. And you can catch his podcast on Spotify. Jack Windsor, founder and chief editor-in-chief of the Ohio Press Network. Thanks for joining us today. Apprentice Isabella, thank you for producing. I am Joe. We will be back tomorrow with our post-debate analysis, and hopefully you'll have a chance to join us. In the meantime, have a great day, everybody. We'll see you tomorrow.